So I'm Brett Myers, and I'm going to be talking about the role of meter in phonological encoding today. I'm going to tell you about 3 experiments that Dwayne and I have done at Vanderbilt. And I just want to say, so we're looking at phonological encoding, which, by that we're referring to that process where we select and organize segments, phonemes, for a word that we're about to say. So one way that we can investigate phonological encoding is by looking at word lengthening. And what I mean by that is when we stretch out a word based on its surroundings. So if I say, I drank some coffee and couldn't stop coughing, I'm going to stretch out coughing because I've just said coffee, and these 2 words have the same initial phonological segment, cough. But why do we do this? There's generally 2 broad explanations for why this might happen. One is a communicative account, which says we're doing this for the benefit of the listener. So we hyper-articulate, we draw things out so that the listener can tell the difference between coffee and coughing. And there's also a more internal competition account, which is solely beneficial for the speaker. So in this case, we are allowing time for the phonological encoding process. So when 2 words share some phonological overlap, the system needs more time to say that we are about to say coughing instead of coughing. And these 2 theories are not mutually exclusive. They could both be true. But I'll be focusing more on this competition account today. So Sebald and Dell looked at this competition approach by having people repeat word pairs over and over and over. So they had people say, pick tick, pick tick, pick tick, pick tick. And they wanted to see how many times someone could say these sort of tongue-twistery word pairs. And they found that phonological overlap at the end of a word, like pick tick, is not very challenging. So you select the initial phoneme, and that sets you onto the appropriate track for the rest of the word. There are no decisions to be made. There's no ambiguity about what's coming next. But when there is initial segmental overlap, like pick pin, then we introduce some competition. So if we say pick pin, we activate the phonemic sequence for pick, but then we have to decide, are we staying on that track, or are we deviating and creating a new path for pin? And they found that this pick-pin condition took more time to complete a phrase. And they interpreted that as saying that phonemes are selected in sequence. They have a serial order. And the production system takes time to sort out this interference in the case of pick-pin. But what about meter? So in phonological encoding, we've got segmental planning, but we also have metrical planning, which accounts for the stress patterns in an utterance. And of course, meter is very important in English because English is a stressed time language, meaning the stressed syllables can occur regularly with a predictable pattern, like in Dr. Seuss, I do not like them, Sam I am, I do not like green eggs and ham. So you know when the next beat is going to occur because of the metrical structure there. But it's unclear what information needs to be retrieved to determine the placement of stress. So traditional theory suggests that these 2 domains, segmental and metrical planning, happen at the same time or in similar ways, but they are seen as separate processes. And the experiments that I'm going to talk about today are investigating whether or not they really are separate or maybe one and the same. So the Weaver model of word form encoding suggests that metrical and segmental spell out occur at the same time, but they are distinct parallel processes. And Roelofs and Meyer ran a bunch of experiments testing this, and they found that a priming effect such that words with overlapping meter and segments have faster onset latencies, as opposed to when only meter or segmental overlap is in that condition. So, whoops, sorry. So this supports the hypothesis that speakers retrieve metrical and segmental structures independently before associating them in syllabification. And we know that segmental similarity causes some interference in word production. So if meter and segments are engaged in similar ways, if they're similar processes, then we should also see this same interference due to metrical similarity in words. And that's the research question sort of driving this work. And I also want to point out that there are other models for how meter can be planned. So I just talked about the parallel processes model on the left. But there's also a prosody first account on the right. And so this says that there's a metrical framework that is planned first, and then segments are distributed within that frame. But it's just important to note in both of these models, metrical and segmental spellout happen as distinct, unique processes. So here's an example of the lengthening that I was talking about. So if we say canteen candle, we know that candle will lengthen because of the similar segmental spellout between these words. They both have can as the initial segment. So what happens when two words have similar segments and the same stress pattern, like candy candle? Well, if meter is encoded in a similar process, then I would expect that this candle would be even longer, because now we have two modes of interference happening simultaneously, both segmental and metrical overlap. So our lab has been looking at this using a picture description task. And in this task, we throw up 4 images on the computer screen, and the prime image shrinks, the target image flashes, and the participant just has to say what happens. So in this case, they'd say, the casket shrinks, the castle flashes. And we measure the duration of the target word, in this case castle, and we would expect that it would be longer than usual in this trial because of that overlap, the segmental overlap with the prime. And by the way, we do train participants on all of these images so they know what to call them ahead of time. So in our first experiment here, we wanted to see if meter plays an effect in this task. So we had 3 conditions. First, a condition where the prime and target share metrical and segmental overlap, like candy, candle. Then we had a condition with segmental overlap alone, but different stress, like canteen, candle. And last, we had a control condition with no metrical or segmental overlap, like giraffe, candle. And we had 54 disyllabic word pairs. We had 3 counterbalanced lists, so participants only saw each target once. And we had an even number of trochees and iams to balance out stress patterns there. And we had 69 native English-speaking college students complete the task. And here are the results. So we see that the condition with metrical and segmental overlap led to longer target word durations than segmental overlap alone. And both of these conditions had significantly longer durations than the control condition with no overlap. So it seems that meter must be affecting this task, or the task performance in some way. So this led us to think, let's do something like Sewald and Dell and have people do some tongue twisters and see what, how meter plays out there. So for this task, we had participants repeat 2-word phrases. The words were trochees and iams, like in the first experiment. And they had 8 seconds to get as many repetitions out as they could. And then we measured the number of repetitions, the phrase duration, the number of speech errors that they made. And also note that all the word pairs that we used had the same initial segment. So let's see. Okay, so here's the first condition where it was strong, weak, like ballad, ballad. Then we had a weak, strong, like ballet, balloon. We had a ballot, ballet, strong, weak, strong. And then weak, strong, weak, ballet, ballot. So those are the 4 conditions. So this graph shows the average number of repetitions per trial. The 4 conditions are laid out across the x-axis there, where the blue bars are the congruent conditions, meaning the meter is the same in both words, and the green bars are the incongruent conditions where the meter is different. And on average, subjects were able to produce more pairs that had non-matching stress, like ballot, ballet. So this suggests that when meter is the same, like ballet, balloon, it causes some interference with production. And the same is true with speech errors. So here you can see the incongruent conditions in green were easier to get out. They didn't make as many speech errors. And for errors, we're counting disfluencies, sound repetitions, phoneme substitutions. So there's something up with meter, but at this point, it wasn't exactly clear if the effect was due to planning for an abstract metrical representation or something else. So candy and candle have the same stress pattern, strong, weak. So was the additional lengthening due to some competition for using that metrical framework, or was the segmental competition simply heightened due to a surface level acoustic similarity between the words? So candy and candle sound more alike than canteen candle, and maybe that acoustic feedback is what's driving this effect. So in order to look at this, we needed another test condition that looked at metrical overlap without segmental overlap. So we have experiment 3. So in this experiment, it's just like experiment 1, where we've got the picture description task, only this time we added the condition for metrical overlap alone. So these words had no phonemic features in common. They just had the same stress pattern, like guitar, balloon. And again, we used trochees and iambs in this, and we had 60 subjects in this task this time. And again, we showed that metrical segmental overlap led to significantly longer duration than segmental overlap alone. And interestingly, both of these conditions were longer than metrical overlap alone. And again, there's no difference between metrical overlap and the control condition, which means really we're not getting an effect of meter by itself. We had to have some form of segmental overlap first in order to get this effect. So now we can go back to our previously open question and say that the metrical framework alone is not responsible for this word lengthening effect. So if we said mother candle, we would see no lengthening for candle because they don't sound anything alike, even though they do have the same stress pattern. But rather, we suspect the acoustic similarity between words like candy, candle, is what's creating this lengthening effect. And perhaps acoustic similarity starts with segmental similarity, and then it's heightened with metrical stress. So just to recap, we replicated our finding that segmental overlap by itself lengthens a word. And then we also found that when a prime and target have metrical and segmental overlap, this leads to additional lengthening, but we found no effect of meter by itself. So these findings indicate that metrical and segmental planning may be tied together in a critical way that affects the acoustic structure of syllables. So we don't see evidence that metrical and segmental spell out are separate processes necessarily, because if they were, I think we would see a lengthening effect of meter by itself. But instead, it seems that meter must be bound to segments in some way, during the phonological planning stages. So we know that when we say candle canteen, we're activating the same segment can, but this work suggests that maybe we have two separate representations of can, and the degree of word lengthening depends on which representation of the syllable has been activated. So then if we say candle candy, then we're activating the same segment and amplifying that interference that we see in these tasks. So we're suggesting, if this is true, then maybe metrical structure is simply a byproduct of segmental spell out. But of course, additional work is needed to make that claim. And right on schedule, I want to thank our lab members and funders and everyone else here for listening. Thank you.
We have a good amount of time for questions from students first.
I'm gonna count myself as a student still. Great talk, Brett. I think this is super cool. But I want to pick your brain a little bit about the prime situation with iambic stress in particular. These words are systematically lower frequency in English, and I'm wondering if you counterbalance for that in the materials, whether you occasionally had like sort of trogaic stress as the prime and the iambic stress as the targets and so on.
Yeah, so when there was metrical overlap, then both prime and target were trochees or iams. So we used an even number of trochees and iams throughout, so that was counterbalanced. And like you said, iams are less common, and they have a history of having longer durations anyway. So we looked at that, and sort of categorically, iams were always longer than trochees. So yes.
And did the lengthening effect differ across iambic and trogaic?
No, so actually we saw that same sort of step-down approach. It's just iams were systematically longer. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I'm from Rochester. Quick question. So the degree of overlap, was it always at the syllable level? Or was it
Yes. Yeah, it was a syllable.
And I'm asking because a lot of these production models that kind of invoke, et cetera, have beliefs about that. And oftentimes, I guess, so that.
Mm-hmm.
If I may add another quick question, which is that, as you might know, like I'm kind of sympathetic to this kind of production-centric view, but in a way, like it seems like this kind of communicative approach, like also provides a pretty simple explanation, a very like to some degree, like the similarity, and maybe there's a hierarchy of similarity.
Yeah.
Where, meter on its own isn't enough to be considered like confusable or something like that, but like the phonological or at least the phonemes or something are confusable overall, and especially if the overlapping meters.
Yeah, yeah. So when we have this, when we start talking about acoustic similarity, like you pointed out in a recent paper, it doesn't neatly fit in competition or communicative, but it's kind of its own thing. Right?
Comments from students? Questions? Floor is open.
Could you put up your slide of the two different cans?
Yes. This here.
Yeah. This is so interesting. Could you say, I didn't quite follow. So is the idea that you have the larger font type can when you are a syllable that has a lot of, that is the first syllable with a lot of words with different following syllables?
Well, so my interpretation of this is that we have sort of a can box, and
That's
there's
the big focus
yeah,
here.
and within that you've got a stressed can and an unstressed can.
Oh, is that the difference between these two?
Yeah, that's what I was getting at with that.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
something to do with pitch accents.
Well, who knows?
So can you say a little bit more about the procedure in the experiment where they're just saying the lists, or they're just repeating?
Yeah, that experiment 2, the tongue
Yeah.
twister. Yeah, so they have two-word phrase. They're sitting at the computer. 2 words pop up, and then the words actually go away, and they have to repeat the words for 8 seconds.
Are they doing it in a metrically regular way? Are they?
Well, they're told to say it as fast as they possibly can. So, yeah, I'm sure there's a meter, but it's really globbled together.
Yeah, I'm curious as to whether, like, I would think in that case you're you're gonna entrain and you're gonna be going candle, candy, and that maybe something about actually doing that slows you down in a particular way as opposed to in the other, I don't know.
Yeah.
Or what if you have them do it in time with a metronome? Like, could they speed up, for example? But-
Speed up faster than the metronome?
No, or like if you had them trained to a metronome, would they then adjust
Okay.
the speed at which they're producing them? I'm trying to think about like how this scales up to larger metrical structures.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Mhm.
Oh, sorry.
Can you actually go back to the results for experiment 2?
Yes.
Yeah. So, something that I thought was kind of interesting is this seems to be exactly the opposite of some of Matthew Goldrick's findings on segmental stuff, right? So for him, he finds that when you have these switches, like strong, weak, strong, you're more likely to get slips of the tongue at like the strong, weak or the weak, strong order. And clearly this is different because we're not going to switch syllables around in that way. But I think that do you have any thoughts about that?
So I'm not familiar with the stimuli that he used in this.
So it's like you said, stuff like big, 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 big,
Mhm.
big, 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 and then having people say it in like different A, B, B, A, or A, B, 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 A sort of things. Yeah.
Yeah. So, did he use monosyllables, or just?
Yes.
Yeah. So I feel like that would be the primary difference. I'm not quite sure.
I thought those were tongue twisters, in which case you have a longer planning sort of scope that you have to manage.
Well, the one I'm thinking about is just monosyllable.
Wait, how do you have words that have flashing stress and monosyllables?
They don't have flashing stress. I was just asking how, like, the results here seem to say that, like I would expect that if you had like strong, weak, that you would be able to say it faster because there's like a rhythmic sort of like thing going on, impulse, I suppose.
Yeah.
So it's surprising that the alternating one is the one that you can say faster.
Right. So that, I was sort of on that rhythmic bandwagon too, thinking, hey, rhythm's going to solve everything. Rhythm will give us more repetitions in this case. But I think having that similarity is what's creating some clash in the phonological encoding, which slows us down as we're, coming up with the next word to say, if that makes sense.
So along those lines, if you try running a control condition where they don't overlap, they just have to be metrical structure.
No.
But
But-
you might answer that.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe one more question. Hila?
Yeah, I was wondering if your results have any implications for the explanation for why this is happening, right? Or is it more listener oriented or it
Yeah.
looks like, right?
Right, so we sort of started to talk about that just a couple minutes ago, where it's kind of in between. It may, since we're going off of acoustic similarity, the listener is involved in that, by nature, but there's still this, it seems like, competition at the phonological level. So it's kind of its own, it's like a third option almost, where it's sort of acoustic feedback, driving that, possibly.
Thank you.
Thanks.